And welcome to Live Support Live, the weekly show that has Larry drop off in the middle of the countdown. Hi, everyone. This is the weekly show that explores how Star Trek can help us to boldly go in our own lives to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. And at some point, Larry is going to be rejoining us, but the part of the intro that he usually says is, as a famous starship captain once said. But wherever our mission takes us, we'll have a little fun along the way, as another famous starship captain once said, who has a new series that I think might be finishing production very soon. Hello, everyone. I am psychologist Dr. Ali Matu, and usually with me right here, he'll be back. He was having some connection issues. But aren't we all just having connection issues right now? Usually with me is Dr. Trek himself, Larry Nemechek, my colleague. And one of us is a real doctor, and one of us has a real strong connection to the internet right now, and one of us does not. But Larry is restarting his computer as we speak. He's taking those isolinear chips out of the, what are they in? What are isolinear chips in? They're in sockets. They're not in a board. They're in slots. The isolinear chips go in slots. He is taking them out. He is reconfiguring them. He's going to reboot LCARS. I think the problem is, folks, I think Larry just installed a new version of LCARS this morning. And like every chief engineer knows, do not install the LCARS update before you're doing a live broadcast on the Federation news circuit. The Federation news, I forget what it's called, but Jake got some stuff published in it. Folks, what are we doing today? We're talking about Reconstructed history. This was actually a really cool topic that was actually Larry's idea, and I want to give him a chance to introduce it. While I'm waiting for Larry, let's see. We got some great comments already coming in. Of course, the big blue S for the win, says Charlotte. Nathaniel says S, man. And Cairo says, hey, it's Ali and the creepy S. Livy, always with the encouraging Super Larry. Oh, Charlotte says Ali's blue shirt matches the blue S quite nicely. This is my Space Explorer shirt. I wear these shirts and then I'm like, with the way I crop this, it's you can't even see what the heck I'm wearing. So why am I could be wearing the same blue shirt every week and you probably wouldn't know. Oh man. Okay, let's see. Libby says, as a famous Ferengi repeatedly says, where's the profit in this? Oh man, that's like every Ferengi. Cairo says, so many connection issues, especially between me and the people who finally ought to give me a vaccine appointment. Yeah, I'm hoping you get there, Cairo. Hoping you get there. Zahir says, he'll be back. Time will tell. Yeah, it will. Zahir is an old friend of mine who I had a chance to meet in person this week. Zahir's visiting back in California. And Larry just sent me a text. I'm going to read this text verbatim to all of you folks because it just cracks me up. My Mac is giving me fits. You may be starting alone. Yes, Larry. I figured. That's kind of what's happening here. No, I just want to say it was one of the highlights of my week was actually getting a chance to see Zahir in person. Zahir and I go way back to like elementary and middle school era. No bloody A, B, C, or D. 1701 is the era Zahir and I met. And fun fact, He and I are fully vaccinated, and he was the first person outside of my wife and daughter that I have given a hug to in like a year and a half. So, Zahir, thanks for being my first hug of 2021. All right, let's see. Christoph, the MacBook Pro of one of my business partner's daughters died today. Hope that's not a bad sign. Oh no. Hope Christoph. Hope it. I don't know. If it died, I guess maybe it's dead. But it's dead, Christoph. Or maybe it can be fixed. I don't know. I am not a Apple genius. Heidi says lack of connection is my kind of life. Um, well, Heidi, you probably had a pretty good 2020 then because there's been a lot of lack of connection here. Cairo says the problem is he's using a fruit version of LCARs and fruits go bad all the time. Ooh, I think that's a subtle dig at Apple there. And Charlotte says I'm a PC girl myself. Let's see. Libby says, don't install an update right before the Federation news unless you have a spatula and ROM to fix it. You know, ROM would be able to fix this problem. He's got those holosuites running 24/7. He knows what's up. Jared says, okay, everyone, if Larry doesn't come back, we need to take turns Skyping in. That would be a fun show. Let's see. Jared says, so Dr. Ali, while we are waiting, how about you tell us about your YouTube video and how that came about? Yeah, Jared, that's very nice of you to ask. So YouTube released a little documentary they made about me this week. It's about a 3-minute long video. And honestly, Jared, they reached out in the fall and they wanted to highlight a mental health creator on the platform, and they asked me. So we made this documentary. It was all filmed remotely. It was all filmed kind of using my own equipment here, using my own camera, using my own lights, using all of that, and they were kind of directing me remotely, asking me questions, interviewing me remotely. We turned it around in about a week. It was intense. And then they said, okay, thanks. We'll air it at some point. And I had no idea when it was airing. And then they told me this, about a week ago on Friday that it was going to be airing on Monday. So now it's out. So if anyone wants to watch it, it's on the official YouTube. YouTube has a YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com/YouTube, I think it's the first video that's right over there. And I think Jared was nice enough to post the link to it in our group too. So thank you for that, Jared. Super excited and just humbled to have that video out there and to have YouTube telling my story. It's pretty wild and pretty exciting to have that out there. Christoph says, well, we do use a Linux USB stick to copy away the SSD content, but it seems that the file system is crap. Okay. That sucks. Hopefully you got the good data, the good content that you needed. Larry, come back. Please come back. I don't want to start the show completely without you. Let's see. Oh, Charlotte says, Charlotte actually had some good IRL contact this week too. I hosted a work event for 50 plus people this week and got to see a lot of folks I haven't seen in person in over a year, including my students. 'Twas lovely and I didn't have a panic attack. Charlotte, that's awesome. I'm so happy to hear you were able to have a in-person experience. Folks, let's see. I might have, things might be happening. The game is afoot. Let's see here. Larry, are you there?
And then it helps if you, yes, okay. Yay. Okay. Wow, everybody, sorry. I was like mud wrestling my basic iMac. Okay, but I think we're good now.
Okay. I think I'm hearing you. You're hearing me.
What did I miss?
What you miss? You miss me
I hear
stalling.
you.
You miss me stalling. That's that's what you missed.
Do you,
Um,
do you have my you have me? I see my video. You have my audio?
yeah, we're good. I
Oh,
think
okay,
I can
okay,
hear you. I can. We are all good. So
okay.
Larry, um I was
Just act like nothing happened.
so I was just stalling. But I didn't want to introduce this topic because this was really your idea, and I think it's a great idea. And you are also the history buff between the two of us. So I wanted to give you a chance to talk about why we're talking about Reconstructed history.
You you didn't even have the history of psychology for your.
I didn't get into it at all because I mean this like if you remember our text I was like, oh Larry, I'd really love for you to like go all out history nerd on us on this episode. So I didn't want to steal your thunder here, so please tell us how'd this topic idea come to be.
Well, no, if anybody's paying attention out in the wider world this weekend, I just thought it might be good for once to be proactive, not reacting. And this is the anniversary. Monday and Tuesday are the 100th anniversary. Not that all centennials are worth just, Yahoo celebrating, but at least reflecting on the anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, which is doubly it's sad and tragic and people whatever, but I am not even a person of color. I'm as white as they come, but it pisses me off because I'm a native Okie and never heard of this until I was out of college that I remember. I don't remember it making a dent on my consciousness until I was well out of college. And really, I mean, they kind of only vaguely. And then, I mean, I was married and we were living in LA and I was back and I got a member when the first year I was a news reporter in Norman, our illustrious editorial writer who had worked at the Oklahoman he was like the dean of one of the deans of reporting and had been this was in the 80s and he had been around since the 40s as a young man, Ed Montgomery, bless his heart. And he retired. He went to his death writing editorials for us every day. But my first year, we had a Christmas draw, and he drew me, and he got me a year's membership in the Oklahoma Historical Society. And then a few years later, I made it a life membership when you could do that. But anyway, when I was visiting the museum when I was back, like in 05, 06, 07, or whatever, the State Museum, we were going through, and Janet actually got this book, which was about the Tulsa, and we had vaguely heard about it, and I was like, oh, look. And you can see they were still calling it the Tulsa Race Riots, which has only been a recent thing. But this is an '02 book that when we bought it was already on the remaindered. It was already on the discount. It had been out for a few years and they were already selling it. So this was like in the late aughts. And that's when I first I was like, oh my God. And this whole thing about, now the Watchmen dramatized it. It's had this
HBO's
renaissance
Watchmen,
here the last
yeah.
5-10 years of awareness.
Yeah.
But this is and since then there have been more and more incidents, especially in this Birth of a Nation, re-rise of the Klan time of the teens and 20s. But it was horrendous. It was the fact that there was this huge black community that was thriving after World War One. There were returning black veterans from World War One coming in that were newly empowered and all that, and it just went ugly, primal, feral over. It was like a lynching on steroids, times 1,000. And it was just amazing. But I mean, aside from the tragedy and all that, it was not only covered up to the people involved and whispered about, and even blacks didn't like bring it up. And then the world moved on, Depression, World War II, and the Cold War and everything, and the Civil Rights Movement. And even then, it really wasn't talked about and mentioned. But like 300, they finally had a state commission actually that did it and looked into it finally to establish some hard facts because there were so little hard facts. But basically, like 300 people died. Dozens of blocks of homes and businesses. It was the most thriving black. They called it the Black Wall Street because it was like one of the biggest enclaves anywhere in the country. We're talking about Oklahoma in 19, and Oklahoma had only been a state for like 14 years. And Oklahoma, like Texas, there had been like some all black towns, totally segregated towns. And it was, it was in the South, Southwest, and there were all kinds of, midnight or sundown towns where you had, if you were black, you had to get out of town or you were, took your life in your hands. And all that racism of the time and overt, violent racism, much less Jim Crow and voting and everything, and the segregated, everything, colored white water fountains, buses and trains, all of that. But the fact that there was this community within Tulsa, and Tulsa, the second largest city in Oklahoma, and still is, and they just went crazy, and because of this one sparking incident that was trumped up like the lynchings would be, a black boy, white girl, and people went crazy. Only this one was about a bunch of black veterans went down to the courthouse to try to keep the sheriff, help them keep not rioting, but keeping whites from doing a lynch mob and grabbing them out of the jail and taking them away. And this is not the 1880s; it's 1921. And they did that well twice, but on the third try, the mob got it and they took off. And then they just went and just burned the black part of town. Was basically what this was. And so it was the initial tragedy was that. Then the tragedy was the next 80, 90 years of this being not talked about, not out there, not even. And even people from Tulsa and Oklahomans not being aware. Am I in sync? Am I looking good?
We're in sync. Yeah, I'm just
okay.
listening. Yeah.
Anyway, so we and I had only I'm on this mission now because every kid in Oklahoma in ninth grade had Oklahoma history for years and years and years and years. Yeah. And there was a textbook called Harlow's Oklahoma History, and I wanted to get one of the two. Like when I was a kid, then they came out with a new one right about the time I had it. And I keep wanting to go back and get it, find a copy somewhere, and see if we even had like a sentence. It was pretty badly written. I mean, it was pretty mundanely written just as a history book. It was just like paragraph as a textbook. But I have no remember, and I'm a history guy, and I have been since I was like in junior high, grade school, junior high, and I had no memory of this at all. And that's what pisses me off as a bystander white guy who's part of the human race. And if I didn't know anything about it growing up, taking Oklahoma history in ninth grade, like, millions of others, much less the rest of the world. And so all this attention the last 5-10 years on this and other huge, where entire communities were burned out when some white rage would spark, anyway, it's just, and, there's complicity, but the fact that somebody even had a plane and they were dropping, bags of kerosene or gasoline or something, and like firebombing from the air, which is documented. It's just insane. Yeah. So all of this dramatization this weekend is full of documentaries and news specials and things, and it's all good. And a lot of people are going, "Oh, I had no idea about this," and it just pisses me off. I mean, I read this book, 10, 12 years ago, and was like, oh, my God. And it took, to their credit, 5-10 years ago, Oklahoma had a state commission, and now they're rebuilding. I mean, they're having a very big dedicated area in memory and homage and renewal there. And they've had a state commission go through and, multiracial, bipartisan commission go through and try to get to the bottom of but just last fall, I was catching up on this. Just even after that all got in motion and paying, not celebrating, but paying memory this weekend, having a big thing and a year-long deal and curriculum in schools, the State Department of Education and all this kind of thing. But just last fall, they found a new mass grave that they're sure is related to the massacre. There's at least 30 bodies, and now they're doing DNA on them and trying to find people's. Because it split, it came back kind of, but a lot of people left. A lot of people, but it took the wealth. Yes. They talk about the wealth gap and what redlining in real estate did over the centuries, and the generational loss of wealth is part of the systemic racism of the country. And that just set tons of, there were banks and theaters and hotels and people's businesses and two newspapers and all of this that was totally, bombed out. And even aside from the initial fire and just whatever, they took 8,000 blacks down to the National Guard Armory and just kept them there for 6 or 8 days. Anyway, it's an amazing thing. So we're looking at our topic for the week, and this is, if it's not on top of mind for a lot of people, it probably will be by the time Monday and Tuesday get here. And it's Memorial Day weekend. Happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody,
Yeah.
in the States. So anyway, I just thought that, like all good topics, Star Trek, not overtly maybe, but has a lot of parallels and echoes of what we're calling today reconstructed history, meaning, as opposed to also, not that there was like a gap in history, that we either was aware of and we need to figure out that mystery, or it just comes out of nowhere and we go, oh, look, we just learned something new. But rather, when we had something totally wrong, or something had been, to coin a phrase, whitewashed, or, something was wrong, and we've gone back to get it right. And yeah, we did talk about living witness under the guise of documenting things wrong. But a lot of times it's not that things were earnestly done and they were just wrong, which happens. Sometimes when that happens with an overt agenda and things are just covered up. And I know a couple of instances in our year. I know at some point under another topic, we talked about the Voyager show Remembrance, where the
Right.
culture had a Nazi Holocaust type past, and they had reformed, but rather than reform with the strength of remembering their roots, they had tried to cover up the bad part, like, makeup, and gone on like everything was perfect, and they were just ripping the Band-Aid off. So that's part of this. But to actively have had a history and then covered it up and then acted like it never happened, that was a thing. Or somebody, to the point where somebody, anyway, that's the inspiration, everybody. And if you
Yeah.
weren't aware of the Tulsa race, and it's been reframed, even when I learned about it, even 15 years ago, they were still calling it, if they talked about it, they were still calling it, the name was the Tulsa race riots. But the riot implies that, blacks just up and went crazy for something. And they've reframed it as, and they've done this in a lot of situations. Now it's called the Tulsa Race Massacre, because that's really, really what it was.
Yeah, Larry. When you brought this up as an idea, I thought it was a fantastic topic for us, and we'll get into the counselor's log. But I actually have a lot to say about this, and it's probably not what people think I'm going to say.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of great examples in Star Trek as we identified in our preparation for this. But just to reflect back on what you were saying, this was not something I was honestly aware of until I saw that first episode of HBO's Watchmen. And as I was watching that episode, which does dramatize this massacre that happened in Tulsa, I'm watching this and I'm thinking, wow, what, this is like, I'm assuming this is fiction. I'm assuming
Right.
that this level
Wow, what
of
imagination. How tragic. But what
yeah, yeah, and like I had no idea that there was an area, a black populated area in Oklahoma that was the Black Wall Street that was doing so well in this era, and there's so many tragic things that happen here. The loss of life, the covering up of the history, and then you mentioned the erasure of the wealth, which is why I think this was so threatening to so many whites in the area. Is this black population was doing very well, and that posed a threat to them. So I think this is a great example of reconstructed history because, as you said, it hasn't been a part of our conversation, and there are many examples of that in all history across the world for a wide variety of reasons. A lot of these events are not told. They're not taught. And yet we are still living with the consequences. So we live with the consequences of the events that occurred, but we don't have the narrative that helps us understand why people might be in the situation that they are. And that's the importance of reconstructed history. And I think and Star Trek has a lot to tell us about this.
Yeah, I mean, we have more globally, we've got Holocaust deniers to this day.
Yeah.
And that was,
There's there's a lot here.
this was a few thousand. That was 6 million plus all the people. There were
Yeah.
that's 6 million deaths plus everybody who observed. I
Yep, and we got a lot of examples to go through. So, as we open up our briefing room here, we'd like to hear from you. What are the examples from Star Trek where you see this theme play out about reconstructing history or a new understanding that emerges of historical events?
yeah.
We've got a
And
lot of examples here, but we'd love to hear from
yeah,
you too.
and I'll just say, it's not always, it may not always be, deaths and tragedies, and it may not always be about hate. It may be about just ignorance. It may be about manipulation of an agenda, and it may have nothing to do with people, like with a genocide type situation or whatever. It may just have to be with people ignoring the reality of facts in front of them. But it affects, if either just a culture itself, until a third party comes in and says, whoa, or I'm confused, why are you not doing so and so? But or if there's a more malevolent element to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one comment I want to share before we move on to Star Trek. Charlotte said, "I was born in Tulsa, but only learned about the Tulsa
Mhm.
Race Massacre in the last year or two from an episode of the podcast Stuff You Missed in History Class. It really is infuriating."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Charlotte, it's something we all feel, and I can't imagine for you living in Tulsa or being born in Tulsa. I'm sorry, how that would be. And Heidi also says the winners write the history books, and this is why they're primarily written by white men about white men, which is very much the case in the United States. And Nathaniel says many of these important instances of injustice end up being only remembered by professional historians, unfortunately. One thing I want to say about that, Nathaniel, is there's been a lot of discussion in the United States about anti-Asian hate, and there are many examples of discrimination against Asians that has happened over and over again throughout history. And we're talking here about Tulsa and the Tulsa Race Massacre. There's also the genocide against Native Americans that occurred. All of these events, it's not these are not this is not like diverse history. This is American history. These are very core to what to the complexity that is the United States. And so often, Larry, they're kind of pushed aside as not a part of American history, but this is American history, and it needs to be taught
Or
alongside everything else.
Yeah, or a boy. We were so dumb back in those days. Look how stupid we were. But thank God that's kind of where I was a naive
Yeah.
kid. It was like, wow, yeah, wow, slavery and racism and the China's Exclusion Act and sticking,
Yes.
and grabbing land from Indians and Native Americans and all of that. And it's like, but at least we've learned our lesson and we're doing better now. And then it's like, not only it's just been this long, painful. Not everybody was part of the Constitution. The women didn't have the vote, and blacks were supposed to, and they didn't. And Indians weren't made citizens until the 20s or early 30s. And then you get older, and you go, no, oh wait, I thought we were on this like upward bound curve. Who's trying to like drag us back down into the 1800s or 17? And that's what's been infuriating the last 20, 30 years. And if I've come from a point of privilege where I thought that was happening, and anybody in those communities could go, oh, that's been fixed. Oh,
Yeah.
really? Or, oh, it's not as bad as it used to be. Or maybe it's just not as stupidly obvious. Maybe everybody's gotten way better at, kind of papering over. So if nothing else, and the events of the last 5 to 10 years, especially, but that's what's jarring to me. And I feel like I've had as a stupid white guy from Oklahoma, but that's where I feel like that's what makes me mad about this topic is the Tulsa Race Massacre. Is like, why was I never told about this? It's like, wait a minute. And I don't like we went through the Cold War making fun of the Soviet encyclopedia. I remember our library had a copy of this, like the World Book or the Britannicas. And you'd read the entry on the American Civil War, and it was totally like from a totally, Marxist-Leninist point of view, where it was all about the economics of slaves and the North and the South and all that. It wasn't so much about it was about the morality, but it was all told, and a lot of times everything would be economic, and sometimes there might be a point to it. But a lot of times things were just completely omitted, and we used to laugh about, something just being wiped from the Soviet. Oh well, the Soviet Encyclopedia won't have an entry on this. But then you find out that that's been happening in a lot of there's a lot of things like the
Yeah.
Tulsa Race Massacre that had been Soviet encyclopedia, just wiped out, and it pisses me off because that
Yeah.
was supposed to be, what the bad guys did, and
Yeah.
these people that don't, go. The idea that we can have people now go, oh my God, this has been omitted. Quick, let's get this out and make up for it. Okay, at least doing that, and to still have people that go, now, wait a minute. We don't really need to know about this. The
Yeah.
minimizing even then is what pisses me off. Anyway, and
Christina.
we're in the middle after January 6th. We're in the middle. We're watching that in real time right now.
Christiana says, also missing from this conversation is a lot of the other autocracies that other ethnic groups, such as Asians and Hispanics, have experienced. I mean, the worst was targeted at blacks, but as someone who's Latinx, I almost never hear that side of the story told during talks like this. And related to your comment, Christiana, is Nathaniel. Nathaniel says, to put it another way, anti-Latino discrimination as well as anti-Semitism is my family history. It is not something unknown to me as it is to others. And there's, we could spend, and
Yeah, we should get to Star Trek.
Nathan, yeah,
Yes.
I misinputted Nathaniel's comments. He said this first, which was, I know that these events are surprising to many people, but from the perspective of being Mexican American, we live in the shadow of discrimination and intolerance. Yeah, it's
I had never heard about the Zoot Suit riots until I was in LA for 10 or 15 years, and it was a local thing, but that was anti-Hispanic and Mexican rioting, like a spark that was.
Yeah,
Anyway, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Larry, I grew up. I grew up in California, and when you were learning about the Oklahoma history in ninth grade, I was learning about Californian history, and um, I didn't really learn about the discrimination that here I'll give you a simple example. The 49ers, not the football team, although the football team are named after the individuals. The people who came to California, the white people, the white men who came to California looking for gold, committed a lot of autocracies against the people who are living in California, a lot of Native American population, and all of that is completely glossed over to the point where, our great football team here in Northern California are named after these individuals, and that was not something I learned until much later in life. Most of that was wiped away from my Californian history that I received, decades ago now. I'd like to believe it's better, but I don't know. So in Cairo, I should say here says it's not that easy for non-Americans to relate to such single points of history of a
Mhm.
foreign country, but we have our own examples in different ways, and not everyone even agrees on how those should be viewed. Yeah, absolutely. And Steve here says, bringing in
I
more of
just
a
say Cairo and has, to his point, Europe has the benefit. It's amazing because the whole point of America was to be, oh, look at those crazy Europeans. They've been fighting over religion, and they've been fighting ethnically for hundreds of years. We're going to make a clean start, and we won't have class, we won't have nobility, and we'll have a democracy and everybody equal and blah blah blah. And yet I feel like we've got a Europe's worth of issues to deal with. If you start with the 1619 project, we've got that's what, 400 or 500 years right there. So we're not quite the spring chick, we're not quite the newborn innocent babe. Yeah, Europe has 2 or 3 times that recorded, and then you have the ancient peoples going back to everybody fighting. Thank you, humanity. Thank you, Homo sapiens. But like they just came up with it. Did you see this in the news? They just found skeletal remain, like ancient fossilized skeletal remains, thousands of years ago, of like the earliest dated fossils of humans caught in a fight. Like
No, I
there were
didn't
two
see that.
people battling. They had some kind of rudimentary weapon, like knives or something, and they found and there are thousands. Anyway, I shouldn't throw it out being so, but it was like thousands of years old, like pre major civilizations. It was like, oh well, that's depressing. Uh,
Yeah.
Sorry,
There's
Star
no,
Trek.
no, no,
Star.
no. There's so much here. Steve said. Steve talked about Germany this week apologizing for their actions while
Mm,
colonizing Nambia, and agreeing to pay
wow,
reparations.
and
You
that's
know,
150 years old. Yeah.
yeah, it makes me think of colonization and imperialism, and my family's from South Asia. My family's from Pakistan, and before the British colonization, it was before partition, I should say, and before the colonization of India. The region was a very different place, and under British colonial rule, there was no economic increase in income for Indians throughout the entire time that the British colonized the country. The British really sort of
Suck the wealth out of
squeezed.
the country.
Yeah, the British really squeezed the country dry, and then when the partition happened and the separation of Pakistan and India, and at the time what was called East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh,
Mhm.
the individual who the British brought in to draw the line separating India and Pakistan really knew nothing of the region. I believe he was a lawyer. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he just sort of drew this line, and in some places completely separated communities. There's a Sikh temple that of a holy site that got partitioned into the Pakistan side, and the community that take cares of and goes to that temple got partitioned into the India side. And there's a number of events like this where there was no clear understanding at all of the region, the people, and has led to decades and decades of long conflict and separation, as and continues
I,
to play out. So,
was that the guy that they pulled in a few years earlier to partition up the Middle East after war after the Ottomans broke up?
that is a whole
Just draw
another
some
and sadly
lines. Hurrah! What
similar
is that? Okay, we'll just
similar
draw some lines.
problem. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot to talk about here, and there's actually a lot of Star Trek. So let's sort of let's get into the Star
Yeah,
Trek examples here.
like the
Um,
room of this.
yeah, let's open up that briefing room. Let me just
Let's
put
use our
that. There we
graphic. We
go.
have a structure. And you know what?
um,
I missed the opening. Did we? You didn't. We didn't get to tell everybody who. I trust that you told everybody what
I
the
told
show.
everyone who you are. That I did.
Hello, it's
But
welcome to Sociology is Us this week on our podcast feed.
So yeah, every week what we do here is we take examples from Star Trek that help us to understand mental health. We talk about mental health that helps us to understand Star Trek. We have a lot of fun along the way, and hopefully you're gonna have some takeaways here that help you to boldly go in your own life. And there's a lot to talk about here with Star Trek,
Mhm.
Larry. Where do you want to begin? Because we can go anywhere in the timeline. There's a lot of
Well, like
stuff here.
like I said, the with the I hate to say inspiration, but with the key being the Tulsa Race Massacre, that's a horrific and tragic event, and that includes a lot of this. And sometimes it's not even about ideology and all that. Sometimes it's just about you're stuck in a groove of thought for so long that any kind of new information comes in when you've got it right in front of you and you don't want to accept it. I mean, like we one of my favorite Voyager episodes, and I guess maybe it's getting more attention. I was just overwhelmed, not being a huge fan, being disappointed in Voyager most of the time, as far as potential goes. But when they did Distant Origin with the Voth, and I didn't pull an image from this, but I love that because it's a very Roddenberry-esque kind of, science versus ideology when the ideology clearly needs to be revised. But the thought, the religion of the planet, of this reptilian planet, spacefaring reptilian race, it was a little far fetched that they had common roots with Earth. But okay, aside from that, the fact that they had this internally presented, and they had a scientist discovering some science stuff, and the church of the Voth didn't want to accept it, and then Voyager via Chakotay is drawn into the story. That's a thing we've cited that before for other. But another one, they go
I
back
love that episode, by the way.
I
I that is one of my favorite. I think it's such a great. So you have the
it's
reconstructed
a
history.
Copernicus Ptolemy,
Yeah,
Darwin
it's
thing.
there's two ways that episode plays out. One is the reconstruction of the history of Earth, and who was the first species that left that planet, right? Um,
Yeah.
but you also have in a similar way as we have right now, the denial of climate change science and
Hmm.
the findings there. You have that same thing at play with the society. They do not want to accept the findings of the scientists and what they mean because of how it'll politically impact the country. And so in that process, you have a new narrative that emerges that explains what's going on here.
Right. So that's a well-worn episode I love to trumpet, because of that, and in the Star Trek way of taking, an issue from today and giving it, not just redoing it, but giving it an alien slant. But another one way back in the good old original series is, the best title ever, For the World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky, which is what I sent you one of there with a red tint. But the idea that these people think they're on a planet and know they're in like a little mini Dyson sphere. They're within a ship that's taking them to a new world, and Kirk and Spock just help get them reset back to where they're going. But it's been so many hundred years they forgot that they're on a ship. They're not on a planet, and their Oracle, they're another great talking computer caretaker, has kind of buffered the truth from them. So here's a case where it's not humans and Earth and the Federation mainstream, but it's a Planet of the Week, which are also great, like the Voth in Distant Origin. It's like a great Star Trek thing to use the Planet of the Week to tell the fable, the parable. But sometimes they turn the tables, and it's on the good old humanity and Federation itself. So
Yeah, what I like about this example, Larry, is it speaks. It
and
speaks.
again, just to put limits on, I told this to you for everybody, and I had to reconstruct the chat here, everybody, so I'm way behind. But we could have gone on and on forever about, again, just gaps in history that
Sure.
something were filled in a surprising way. But I was focusing on things that we assumed or like didn't see coming at all, that were like a shock to the system and forced us, or that were ignored.
Yeah,
Like until being forced, your survival depends on this, or your cultural peace depends on it. So
what's
yeah.
funny? As I heard you say this episode name, For the World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky. Boy, doesn't it sound like a Star Trek Discovery title? That just sounds like it doesn't sound original series. That sounds like Star Trek
Well,
Discovery.
DS9 had a couple of those. Wrongs darker than death or night.
Right, right.
There were throwbacks. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, what I like about this example too, Larry, is we've been talking about a lot of societal reconstructed history and a lot of tragedies that have occurred, that have impacted different communities. This example kind of brings up how this also plays out in families.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, you might have a dark family secret.
Yeah.
Uh, and I say dark in terms of the family perceives it that way, although I don't think there should be any shame in this.
Mm.
Whether it is a substance use problem that someone experienced. Maybe an individual died by suicide, but they
I
describe it as a
say
heart
any kind of
attack.
mental health image
A
issue.
lot of mental health, yeah.
Crazy Aunt Martha, we kept her in the attic, so nobody would.
Um,
Yeah.
Gambling related issues, hoarding related issues, these kind of things. Sometimes parents, aunts, uncles, they change the circumstances, and in doing so, they're wiping away the reality of what happened for future generations. And why this is such a problem, we can debate whether or not that's good or bad, but why I think this is very dangerous to do that is much the same way like Tulsa, where the impact of wiping away the wealth, wiping away generations of
Security, the
family, the
confidence. Right,
security,
right, right. Yeah.
destroying the
The trauma.
community, the intimidation, all of that, all of that. It still plays out in the future.
Hmm.
We are still living. History is alive around all of us right now. I'm really butchering a Octavia Butler quote. But history is alive, right? We're still dealing with the consequences of this. And similarly in families, if a relative had schizophrenia, the descendants have a right to know because they might carry a genetic risk. And the earliest they can know about this and understand it, the better off they will be if they too are impacted by this problem. I totally get that very young children might not be able to understand a substance use disorder, but teenagers, they can.
Hmm.
Definitely young adults, and they need to know if there's some kind of risk to this. So this is a great example, Larry, because this doesn't just happen in societies; this happens in families. I didn't know, Larry, that I had an uncle on my dad's side who drowned when he was young. I think he was in his 20s.
Oh,
And I never knew that. And I was with my dad, and we were driving, and we one day by chance drove past the area where he drowned. And I was in my 20s, and my dad said, "Yeah, that's where your uncle drowned." And I'm like, "What? Who? Uncle who?" And it was so painful for him that he just never
hmm,
shared it with me because it's a very sad memory for him.
a dark
But
page.
yes, and
Hmm.
what happened is now I understood why my dad was so anxious and uncomfortable in open water, and why and how those things probably played out for me. I had a shark phobia. I never really knew how to swim well. Water was associated with a lot of scary things, and now the dots were beginning to connect. Like, oh, I get it now. And I think that kind of stuff happens sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, and sometimes a little bit of both in a
Yeah.
wide variety of families.
Yeah. Well, it's like the wise wizard NBC used to say, the more you know, or Super Rocky on ABC used to say, knowledge is power. So, yeah.
Nathaniel, I just need to comment on this. It says, Uncle Who? Was there another doctor in the Matu family? A Doctor Who? They're actually, so funny thing, Nathaniel, my uncle is a cardiologist, and forever people used to say Dr. Matu as a form of respect to him because he was the most highly educated person in our family. And so Dr. Matu was my uncle. And then once I got my doctorate, I was kind of being an ass, Larry. I'm like, we can't call him Dr. Matu anymore because now there's two. There are two here. But that was me just being an arse. Um, Larry, we've got so many other examples, and I think we could
Yeah.
spend like hours talking about each one. Can I pretty please bring up the one that's my favorite example that you came up with? Um,
Okay.
I love this example so much. But does anyone remember this episode from Deep Space Nine?
This is
Was this
actually the first thing I thought about when we had this entire topic, and it's not humans and it's not the Federation.
Oh, I love this example so much. So this is Explorers from Deep Space Nine. Is that the name of the
Hmm.
episode? Yeah.
Hmm.
So in this episode, just to refresh everyone's memory, Benjamin Sisko wants to build a sailing ship that supposedly the ancient Bajorans used, and not supposedly they did use it, but what was supposed is these stories that the Bajorans would tell that these sailing ships would travel these long distances. And to kind of sum it up, this Bajoran ship actually does travel at warp due to some of
Some
the
interstellar winds and it catches
yes,
that. Yeah, because
yes,
basically people are like, oh, the Bajorans never had warp drive. If they'd had warp drive, the whole Bajoran Cardassian dynamic would have been different, right?
right.
Because they wouldn't have been under the thumb of the Cardassians. It's a lot like in Earth history. I think about it a lot as empires, cultures, and empires that used to be in ancient times, like China or Persia or Egypt, that used to be huge, and now they're not. Well, China's on the rebound, but say
The
100
Mayan
years ago,
Empire.
the time of the Boxer Rebellion and all the European domination of the Chinese ports. At that time, it was like, oh well, here's the paper tiger. Here's the once mighty empire that never got modern, and we've out modernized it. That's the way I always thought of that show was so wonderful because they were like,
It,
oh look, we
yeah,
did travel faster than light, and we did it before you did,
and
and
it speaks to that
and even your
dynamic.
plot goes, oh, okay, guys. I mean, that was a very weird moment, even personified that way for.
Well,
Oh,
a lot of people in the comments brought up the Cardassians. And Libby says the Bajoran Cardassian War. We think there's a clear villain, and then we get a glimpse of the other Cardassians who aren't like Dukat. And Dukat is constantly trying to rewrite the narrative. How many times does he talk about how the occupation was good for the Bajorans, that the Cardassians
my
helped
children.
my children, I helped them in much the same way that most colonizers have described. Well, we are the British and we gave the Indian people our train system and our wonderful education system, which kind of sweeps under the rug the wiping away of the
Mhm.
culture that exists over there and what kind of amounts of slave labor that was used to construct this for their own purposes. But the Cardassians do this all the time. Victoria says, I suspected that the Cardassians do extensive reconstruction of their history. Their culture seems very stagnated, perhaps because they can't learn from their history or move forward. In this episode, what's such a threat, Larry, is this idea that the Bajorans might have had some technological superiority to the
Mhm.
Cardassians. And I love how this episode is Jake and it's a father-son episode.
Mhm.
I love that it's about the reconstruction of history. I love that it's about ancient space travel. This episode is it's so mwah. I love
And
this episode.
yes, yes, and nobody, it kind of like came out of nowhere. Everybody's like, "Whoa!" You think, "Oh yeah," you think it's a father-son episode, and then you get all these undertones to it. But it gets me back again here. You think about the Cardassians, what we know about them, and yeah, so we had like not one, they weren't regulars, but they might, especially Garrick. Between Garrick and Ducat and Bajor, it wasn't a planet hopping mission of the week show, since DS9 stayed there, and one of the aspects of its staying there was not just the Bajoran political situation, but the whole Bajor Cardassia dynamic, and then Cardassia itself, and yeah, and Damar also, and we see the whole arc
Oh,
of Cardassia.
Damar with his canar.
There you go, set it up for you. Um, but not
Thank you
only
for
is
the
it like
assist.
there's an arc for
Wait,
you
no,
see.
it's assist. Sorry,
Oh, okay. I
wrong sport.
not, not my sport, so okay. But Cardassia as a society has a great arc from the time we see them as the bad guys, occupying Bajor and just being the mean guys on the block that the Federation has to make a draw line with when they don't get it right either. all the way through to seeing them, through the guise of Garrick and Damar, but see them sympathetically after Ducat, hitches them to the Dominion, and then they're almost wiped out by the Dominion, basically wiped out, massacred, and you feel, and it's weird. That's a whole lesson there, feeling sympathy for the people who used to be, it's kind of like watching the Germans with the Berlin Wall and going, well, these are the guys we hated, and now suddenly they're sympathetic. I mean, there's a little bit of a thing there. But really, what's really weird is, like, for all the thing about, well, look, they had 2 or 3 semi-regulars, so we really fleshed out the Cardassian. No, we fleshed out the Cardassia of the last 100 years. Garrick they're always talking about the Second Republic and all of that, and they're great, poets, and they're great novelists and theater and all that. And what intrigues me about Cardassia, and what I wish they could get back to them a little, not that I'm a huge Cardassian fan, but what's intriguing me about them is Cardassia is a perfect example of a culture that probably at one point really was a functioning republican democracy and slid into fascism, while keeping all the trappings. And you watch a Cardassian court, okay, that's pretty inverted, that's pretty messed up. But at one time, was it more, where the guilty weren't presumed, or you weren't presumed guilty, and you had to prove your innocence. But I just wonder if you went back 200, 300, 400 years ago, and we ever got a story that fleshed out how Cardassia slid into fascism. That would be a tale which could reverberate with a lot of cultures, past and present. So anyway, that's just when we think about Cardassia, we only think about what we know of the last 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
In DS9 time, and it would be interesting. I think they've shown a Cardassian in future far distant Discovery. No big point. I just think you saw one as a background alien. So anyway, at some point it would be fascinating to see the backstory. I know they may bring them up to date too on Discovery, but 800 years, 900 years. But anyway, that's one thing I just want to throw out there, that they could be a cautionary tale about how they got there, because they have not always been that way, and Garrick and others love to point that out at times, or just dropping the bland historical reference. Well, during the Third Republic, like it's France or something. But yeah.
And if I can jump way back,
since we were geeking out on Cardassia there for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, we could this topic, like, we could do a whole deep dive into Cardassia, which maybe we should do at some point.
Maybe we should do that sometime.
Yeah,
I don't know, do you ever just focus on a culture?
I think
maybe we should start that.
That's a good idea. We're on to something there, Larry. I'd love to jump way back to
yes, Mr. Peabody.
Let's jump way back to another example from the timeline that I think is pretty critical here, and that's the
Foundation. That one, yeah.
The Enterprise actually has a lot of these, and one of them that I love is the Andorian incident. So this is the first time we see the Andorians in Star Trek Enterprise. If I remember correctly. Yeah, and to refresh everyone's memory, there's this Vulcan
outpost.
Yeah.
No, it's a monastery. It's really supposed to be a monastery. Yeah.
It's supposed to appear. They seem really angry, and they're like, "Hey, they got a secret thing going here, a secret military base, and we're not going to stand for it. Don't believe these Vulcans." And the humans are kind of like, that doesn't. I don't know. But you know what? We're going to hear you out. And the reveal at the end of the episode is
the humans say, "If you would stop shooting at us, we'll hear you out."
Yeah. Please stop. Please stop attacking us. And the reveal at the end of the episode is the Andorians are right. They're absolutely right. The Vulcans have been lying about this, and
but it's not just that the Andorians were right; it's that the Vulcans.
I think the Vulcans blocked Larry's signal. Larry. There you are.
Okay.
Yeah. You froze when you said the Vulcans. I feel like the Vulcans blocked you right there.
I know it's a little hard to build up some. Okay, am I consistent?
You're back. You're here.
Okay. This has been another weird tech day, guys. Okay.
It's weird tech, but yeah, I really like this episode too for a lot of reasons, and it is the Vulcans, for their own military interests, have set up this outpost and are really trying to deny the true narrative, and they're trying to create their own narrative and convince everyone else of it. And the humans and Andorians sort of jointly discover that they are completely false. And that speaking of Vulcans hiding their narrative here, this happens again in Enterprise, in a
Well, this was
very
this
big
was kind
way.
of the this was like the bookend to that because there was this could be a K3. There was a whole issue the way Enterprise started. A foundational piece of Enterprise was the Vulcans being possessive and patriarchal and keeping Earth being very paternal, almost toxically paternal. But you guys aren't ready for this. You're not ready for this. Pat you on the head kind of stuff, and which Archer rebels against. And increasingly, you see these. You see the groups that do all things that we think about being Vulcan, the Vulcan Death Grip and the mind melds and all that stuff. That's a faction. And then you see the Vulcans being all militaristic and the thing with the Andorians and in general. And they finally, in the year that Manny Koto fixed things, you see that one of the trilogies is the Vulcan trilogy, where you get to the reason why, and it's because, yeah, they intone and blather about Surak and all of his foundational principles and logic and blah blah blah, but they're clearly not being rational here if you follow the chain of progression out here. And this is the apex of that trilogy, the Kirshara, where you find out that
Yeah.
this so-called radical terrorist band are really just pure Vulcans trying to get Surak's teachings back out. And you
Yep.
even find that the bureaucracy of Vulcan government has gone, neoconservative, rightward. They're making war with Andoria to the point where, and I'm still confused about whether, because I know what the script was, where actually the leader of the Vulcan government is a Romulan spy, which hello Commodore O. Um, what a thing.
Those
But it's like,
Romulans.
but they fixed the Vulcans in that you see they had been partly just led astray, and then Romulus taking advantage of it, to try to really stir some, and then really resent. Oh, we would have got away with it too if it hadn't been for those human kids. I mean, you know, and their friends. But that the Kirshara is so pivotal because it took a human to come in, which I know sounds a little bit like what do they call that? The good
The
white,
white savior.
the
Yeah.
white savior. It's almost
Yeah.
like this is a human savior thing here, where Archer comes in and helps them find the original Surak arc of teachings. But when they do finally liberate it, no one can argue with this. And all the bad Vulcans that have tilted rightward and fascistic are kind of put in their place. And what's his name Velas goes, fleeing. Basically, he's put away, and everybody kind of gets back to the true root teachings of Surak, which I always thought was great because you could totally. I don't care whether it's Moses or Jesus or Muhammad. All of those who have strayed from the person they first say they're worshiping or worshiping their thoughts, a lot of it seems to have been strayed over the years, and I always thought that was a great analogy back to, getting. But it helped clear up the Vulcan mess that had evolved over the Enterprise and it was kind of a reset. But it was fascinating to see that because you could see the real world analogies of it. And
Yeah.
in that case, fortunately, most Vulcans went, "Oh, my eyes have been opened. I see the truth."
Yeah, Charlotte has a message here. Part of me wonders how much of Vulcan history is revisionist. I mean, they go on about the Great Enlightenment brought them logic and put an end to their violent ways. Yet there were enough Vulcans who disagreed with that movement that they felt the need to leave and form
Hmm.
their own government on another planet, which leads me to wonder something about Vulcan at the time must have made life for those future Romulans unbearable. What exactly did the Vulcans do to the Vulcans who